things to talk about today. Obviously, we're kind of in, it's our fourth day of having some businesses come back open, so that'll be good. I think it would be helpful for all of us. We're actually going to do a quick roll call today. I'm going to ask Dennis to kind of take us through that, just because it's hard for everybody to see who's even here and on the call from our task force. And so we can do that later, or if we can do that real quickly, that would be great. So Dennis, do you want to take us through that?
Sure. If you all want to unmute your microphones, you can chime in, make sure we got everyone here. We've got Jason Smith, we have Bob Koppel, Carla Hagemeister, 383.
I'm here.
All right. And Lisa Sisley.
I am here.
Ed Callis.
Here.
Ryan Knopp. Said he'd probably be late. Robin Cole. Bonnie Mental Health. We'll check back. Linda Cook, K-State.
Here.
And Dennis Butler, RCPD.
I'm here.
All right. And Mike Dodson, former mayor.
Yes, here.
Dennis Cook, Aggieville.
Present.
Tina Scroggs, downtown.
I am here.
Inc. Mickey Dean, Junction City Chamber. Do check back. Kara Holly.
I'm here.
Kelly Laub.
Kelly is here.
All right. Cheryl Grice.
I'm here.
Shiloh Heeger.
I'm here.
Fanny Fang. We'll do Karen Hibbard.
I'm here.
Lonnie Baker. John Ford. Said he might be late. Dee McKee. Potawatomi County. Keith Asher from Gary County. Julie Walter. And Kelly Paskoff.
I'm on the line.
And you have some guests to introduce. We have what? Steve. Tell me your last name,
We
Steve.
certainly do. Our public affairs folks have joined us, and appreciate you guys adding them on to the distro. Steve Elstrom. And Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself, and if Colonel Kelly is on the line.
Did Steve or Lieutenant Colonel, you want to say a few words about your role at the base?
Lieutenant Colonel Timpson, absolutely. So I'm the Division Public Affairs Officer here, and I'm not sure if you could hear Steve Elstrom. He's the Fort Riley Public Affairs Officer. So
I think, Terry, your sound might be a little off on us for right now, but hopefully we'll get you back up on the agenda. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who's having trouble hearing him or not. Back to you, Terry and Steve. And
essentially, we're the public liaison for and so we're available both to this group and to community.
Bob and Jason, are you having trouble hearing that as well?
Yeah, it's all garbled.
Okay, Kelly, if you can let them know, and Steve and Lieutenant Colonel, we're having trouble hearing you through the microphone. So I don't want to read.
Tracking, I'll let them know. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll catch them back on the agenda a little bit later on. So I want to run back through. I did not hear. Did we hear from Mickey Dean? Is she on the call? And then I'll check again. Is Fanny Fang on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And Lonnie Baker, are you on the line?
I
John?
am.
Okay, thank you. John Ford, are you on the line? In a meeting, I know. Okay, Dee McKee? Or Keith Asher? And Julie Walter?
Hi, this is Julie Gobert Walter. I'm here.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay, we're all up to date then. Bob, I got it
Okay.
noted. Thank you.
Very good. And then Dennis, just for your notes, Ryan Knopp at the clinic. So he's with patients right now.
Gotcha.
So I guess just a couple quick updates. One, we have had this been a very positive week in regards to coronavirus. Very few cases in our region, and specifically, at least the last couple of days, we've actually had no new cases in Riley County. If you're interested, we do have 2 positive inpatients at the hospital, and we also have 2 inpatients who are PUIs, and hopefully we will get their labs back today to determine what's going on for them. So I think everybody's aware we've had some businesses that have reopened this week. I think it's kind of a good learning curve. That's one of the things we want to talk about today. We also have a number of businesses who've determined at this point that they are not going to open right now. They're either waiting to get a few other things in order, or they're maybe waiting a few more weeks actually. So, I think again, as we have our conversation, we can probably talk about that a little bit. I think you'd seen the draft agenda. We did want to have some conversation about being open, and I'll kind of turn things over to Jason to kind of lead us through that.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. So Bob mentioned, and quite frankly, I was a little surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but Bob talked about that a lot of the businesses are opening very carefully, very slowly. So they didn't just see the opportunity to turn the lights on and jump in right away. And I think that speaks volumes for our business community and wanting to do things the right way. I also wanted to mention, because the county did their individual rulings after our last meeting. It was very helpful that Pottawatomie and Riley counties were basically identical, and Gary's was close. It was more closely aligned with the state. There were slight differentiations on Riley Pot and the governor's order. We can talk about those moving forward if we want. The last thing we talked about briefly at the last meeting was the gift of masks from Champion, and we split those up between the counties and the chambers in each one of the larger cities. So Amigo, Junction, and us worked with our cities in giving those away. We had 59 businesses that were able to get masks on Monday, and so I know Dennis and Karen Hibbard on our team, and then Dennis from City Manager's office did a great job on Monday handing those out, and we appreciate you all doing that. We do still have some on waiting lists, so if anybody knows where there are masks, we have, I think, 15 businesses on our waiting list. We also volunteered to, the chamber did volunteer to be the main contact for people who had business questions. So as they were reopening, if it was a health-related question, we directed them to the EOC, the health department. If it was a business-specific question, we took it. And I do want to recognize our economic development staff for manning those calls for this week. But mainly the questions were surrounded PPE, masks, and then specific questions about self-service coffee at restaurants and convenience stores, the shielding that's taking place, and then childcare, youth sports, church services, just kind of a standard across the board kind of questions. So I think what we wanted to do is just open it up to the task force and get some feedback on things that you might have seen or heard over the first few days of being open. So we will leave that open for discussion. Don't be shy.
Jason, this is Mike. I guess I'm a little confused about the PPE. Maybe 2 questions come. One is there a central procurement agency other than the hospitals and so on doing their own? I was at the dentist yesterday and I know they're doing their own. And then kind of second, is there a requirement that the PPE be of a particular type? You know, most of the health agencies have advertised that you don't necessarily need an N95, but you can use a homemade cloth mask and those kind of things. So are we waiting? Are the businesses having to wait for a 95 mask, or can we go ahead with other kinds of PPE?
So I'll answer your first question, then I'll look for somebody in the medical field to answer the second one. We did a centralized point because we had about 1,500 masks to give away. So we gathered, I guess reservations, for lack of a better word, from businesses who were interested in getting those masks, and we gave those away for free. Our staff and our team has put together, and I think they're doing this in the other communities too, but on our website, all of the Manhattan businesses who offer a variety of supplies, so masks and gowns and sanitizer and those kind of things. So there is a centralized point you can go to. You can go to our website, you can go to Region Reimagine website, and you can find out where to buy those supplies. So I will turn it over to somebody in the medical area to answer the specific kinds of materials required.
So I can take a stab at a piece of that. You know, really the N95s are at most beneficial if you're in some sort of aerosolizing procedure. And so if you're doing something that is getting stuff out in the air intentionally or by the byproduct of what you're doing from a patient. So that's why, for the most part, that's healthcare related. You'd be getting some sort of health service. A general surgical mask, I think, is very appropriate for application in a retail, restaurant, workspace type of use. Certainly, you know, they're not at that filtration level, but actually offer a lot of protection. And they tend to be not as expensive and a little easier to procure. Mike, your question about finding PPE, and I think the Chamber's done a nice job of at least getting a list of resources, and here's places to go hunt, if you will. The difficulty all of us are having, and I can speak specifically for healthcare, our supply chain folks we are seeing lower and lower allocations from our normal vendors. And so we're taking what we can get every month from our normal supply chain vendors, and then we are doing spot buys. And so they're just going out and looking every day, where can we buy this or that as a supplement? Because our allocations were based on past historical usage. We, of course, are now exceeding that, but we're not even getting our normal allocation. Some products, we're only getting 30% of what we had used, say, May of last year. And it's all because of the national shortages. You know, I think the CDC recommendation is that people wear masks in public. And I think we would support that recommendation from the CDC. Again, depending on what you're doing, really that drives the need. So for example, if you're gonna go take a walk or you're doing some sort of other activity, it just really depends if are you with other people or not. Because if you're not with other people, arguably you wouldn't need a mask. It's just really when you're with other people within 6 feet, cloth mask is kind of probably the easiest thing for people to access. And then if you can get the other masks, the ones that were donated, you know, that the chambers helped distribute with the city, they were really specifically, we were trying to give a hand up to a bunch of our businesses to get everybody started in this process, knowing it's difficult to find stuff. And we're continuing to look at other options or sources, either via donation or whatever, because we know we've got other businesses that really need kind of that starter kit, if you will, to make that simpler for them to get back in operation.
This is Dee McKee. I wanted to tell you that Champion is providing us some, or Casey Butler and I have had a conversation, and I did have 500, and I can probably get more from a gentleman who graduated from K-State who has ties to China. They are the N95s, but coded for Europe. And I don't think that's on your, I've shared it with some people, but I don't know that it's on your list of availability. He donated the first bunch of them over here, and I've taken quite a few into Manhattan to older people and so on who responded that they wanted some. So we are going to be having county people in the same car and stuff, providing them just for protection when they come back full time. But so far, a lot of people don't want to wear them. If I can help anybody with that, let me know.
To go back to Mike's question, and maybe Ed can expand on this a little bit, masks are not a requirement. They are a recommendation.
That's correct.
This is Ed with the Health Department. Yeah, that is correct. At this time, the local health officer and the incident command team are strongly recommending the use of masks, but they will not be requiring it right now. They will also be coming up with a statement that will be sent to the city commission to kind of give them an idea of what their position is and will be.
Yeah. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the meeting. So
Yeah,
any other thoughts or comments that have come out of the first 4 days of being open?
Well, Jason, let me just follow up. I think there's a certain amount of confusion created by business owners and employees wanting to be as safe as what is being recommended. And that is, geez, I'd like for all my guys to have masks. I'd like for my patrons to have masks, and I'd like for sneeze guards to be up and things like that. So if you've got a condition where we're recommending, but people are walking around, some employees with, some without, you've got an issue that's being created among people. So, I think maybe the recommendation from the county ought to be a little stronger than that, at least for the people who are working in stores and who have to be in close proximity. I mean, how would you open a store and tell some people they don't need masks and others they do? So we may want to think about that a little bit.
As far as I know, they have, but I'm sure they're watching and will be paying attention to what everybody's saying. The only group of people at this point that is required to have a mask are the folks that work in food service. They are required to be masked.
So I have a question for you, Ed, is that what needs to happen or for the city or for Riley County to require face masks? Because I'm a little bit confused, just like what Mike said. There are some places that are saying it's required, some that are not, and there's research that shows that wearing masks is the safest thing to do. So I'm just a little bit trying to understand what the Riley County Health Department is thinking in that.
Part of it is the question of what are you going to do if they don't wear a mask? If you make it a requirement, are you really making a requirement because you want to force people to do it? Or are you making a requirement because there's no place that they can keep 6 feet apart? And that's the goal. If they can stay 6 feet apart, then the mask is not necessarily necessary. There are other people who say that the research that you see in the infographics isn't definitive. Partly, a lot of folks will claim that it also shows that it's a way to get public opinion to move in that direction, but it has not necessarily been proven to be as effective as the public perceives it to be. There are a lot of things that make people feel better, and that's not necessarily what they're looking at on the incident command team, even though that is something that they have to consider. So that's kind of part of it. I'm guessing if CDC comes up with more strict rules, and there are other places that have done more research as we go through this, that might become an issue. But social distancing is the key. And the enforcement issue of, do we enforce people not wearing masks, or do we enforce people opening a bar in Aggieville that's crammed to the gills? Do we do that? Which one's going to be more effective in the long run? Because there's only going to be limited enforcement. There's only going to be so many resources that we can use for that enforcement. And where do we want to do that? Some people can't wear a mask very well. Whether it doesn't need to be fitted like an N95, but some people get claustrophobic. Some people, when people don't understand why they have to do something, it makes compliance much more difficult. And that is also something I believe that they're considering.
So So we actually had planned to have this conversation later, but since we started it, maybe we just move on to it. There was a discussion in the city commission this week in regards to a city ordinance requiring face masks. And Ron, I believe it was a 3-2 vote to put it on the agenda. Is that correct?
So there wasn't a formal vote on any motion. Generally, what I try to do as manager is get discussion from commissioners to whether or not there's a majority that want, at least a majority that want to put an item on for discussion. There were 3 individuals who indicated they were willing to discuss the topic. So as of this time, there's no formal draft or anything like that of an ordinance, but there are at least a majority of commissioners that are willing to have a discussion about whether or not to have an ordinance. All of the issues you've raised are considerations relative to enforcement, and then obviously if you're going to pass an ordinance to require it, the expectation is there that it's going to be enforced and cited, and that it would be a criminal record. So there's lots of issues resulting in that enforcement. A lot of discussion about right now. It's been pretty much up to the business or the store or facility whether they're going to require it and how they're going to enforce that. So again, not everybody necessarily has to choose to access that business under those rules, but that's where the provision has been in place, and certainly Fanny talked about that last time. And again, whether or not they want to supply their customers with masks if that's an option. So there's a lot of issues relative to the masks, and we've just touched on a few, and I don't know if the director would want to comment on some of the enforcement issues.
I could comment on Wamego and our county. I know that you can talk about it in the city, but we do not have any way to take them to courts because the courts are half staffed in the county, and we've left it up to the individual cities to do more aggressive things than what the county says based on what they believe the need is, but it's not going to be something that our county would go any more aggressively on. We will match this. We made those few exceptions on daycare and restaurants, but the rest of it is still the person who's susceptible needs to certainly wear the mask, not to make everybody else, these farmers out here, be ready to execute some of the leadership if we did that, which they are already.
Well, Ron, one of the reasons I brought this up is because you can, if you're downtown shopping, for example, the best case would have everybody be the same, all the businesses be the same. Otherwise, we're going to need something to be posted on the window so that people know that you either go in or with a mask or not. We've already had, this is a national and it's not too many, but yesterday we had 2 shootings as a result of people not complying. So we've got some things to think about on how we execute this.
Director Butler, I think Director Butler has tried to chime in a couple of times, and maybe we'll let him provide his input too.
Well, the city manager asked for my thoughts, so I'll preface my remarks by making a few comments about our philosophy in policing in general, and I hope you all appreciate this approach. I've been in policing a long time. I've seen a lot of different styles of policing, but one thing that I've always known is that your community has to view your approach to policing as though you are the legitimate enforcer of the law. In other words, you're not overreaching, you are not oppressive, you are part of the community, you're the paid members of the community that are there to help preserve the peace, although it is a group effort. The analogy I would give before I go on about some additional thoughts is, we all know when we pass a speed limit sign what the speed limit is. And if we go 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, if we were stopping everybody who did that and writing them a ticket, the legitimacy of that enforcement would erode quickly. And the trust and confidence that the community has in our decision to enforce that so tightly we would lose their confidence and their trust. That's why we have warning tickets. That's why we encourage our officers to explain the purpose of the stop, identify themselves, tell them why they're being stopped, ask for their compliance, find out if they know they were in violation of the law. And I've seen many examples of enforcement around the country. I've seen it in departments I've worked in where those standards were not practiced, and I saw what happened with it. In this particular situation we're in, since this began, I, like many of you, have seen state, national, local guidance on this issue shift, sometimes within 24 hours, about what we should be concerned about, what we should be doing. Now we see states that have vastly different approaches to reopening. Some basically have no restrictions, some have different restrictions in different parts of their states. I could go on, but you know what I mean. That creates a lot of confusion in the minds of citizens when they see that. And we're seeing that around the country, even in our state to a degree, where it's more restrictive or less restrictive than where you live. And I think we've had a great community response to this so far. I think people have taken this seriously and they've done their very best to comply with the restrictions that the governor ordered and what we've done on a local level. I sense, this is my opinion, I sense that we're at the tipping point where if we, through an ordinance, mandate the wearing of masks, I think that legitimacy of that ordinance and our ability to enforce it will not be respected by the community. And I think we're going to have our challenges cut out for us. Now, before I end my comments, and there's a lot of other thoughts I have, but there's a lot of people on this call. Since the governors and local orders came out, we have taken the approach that when we get a complaint, we send a supervisor, not just a street officer, because you could get a street officer with 6 months of experience, whereas supervisors have a lot more experience both in life and in policing to reason with the people who are being complained on and ask for compliance. We've come across two basic situations. Either they didn't know they were in violation, or they felt like the standards didn't apply to them legitimately. They didn't think that they were in violation either. And when we've asked for their compliance, they've complied. My direction to them prior to that was, if you get an outright refusal to comply, then give them a warning and tell them we'll be back in 24 hours. And if this is continuing, we're going to issue you a citation. And there were a number of citations we were willing to give before we took it to the next step. The last thing I want to do is put our hands on someone for not wearing a mask engaged in a otherwise lifelong lawful activity that all of a sudden is not lawful. I think that's a huge mistake to put the city and the police department in that position. However, if an ordinance is passed, we will do our very best to enforce it along the spirit of what I just described, of education and warning, and then eventual enforcement. I'm not in favor of an ordinance. I think strong recommendations on the type of business you have and urging them to provide masks or wear masks or not let people in who don't have masks is a better approach. And if people don't want to go in because they're afraid of being infected because those precautions aren't in place, then that's their choice to not go in there and go elsewhere if they want to. So I'll end. I went on a little bit longer than I intended.
Can I ask a quick question? Then I'm going to give Dennis Cook a chance to comment. this maybe is to Ron or to the police director, either one. A business can require or not require anything. I mean, they have the ability to say, if you come into this business, you have to wear a mask. They have the ability to enforce that, correct? And if someone doesn't comply, they can kick them out. And if there's a problem, they can then call the police and have that person removed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Dennis, go ahead. Dennis Cook. You're on mute.
How about that? Thank you. I would just encourage us to not go over state guidelines. This is tough enough as it is. I think businesses doing it on their own is the way to go, and I think we'll be just fine. And I agree with Director Butler. I think if you try to overreach and over-enforce, you'll just get nothing but pushback, and we are not going to get economic recovery like we're after. I want to be safe. Everybody is cleaning and doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of masks being worn by employees, but to go any further with requirement, I think would be very detrimental.
I could just add a couple of more comments. I believe that based on what we've seen over the course of this, I think we all understand who the vulnerable populations are. People confined in spaces where they can't leave, like nursing homes and jails, prisons, and so on. And if there's to be strong guidance about where everyone should be wearing a mask, whether you live there or are confined there or visit there, that would be more appropriate. I think if you want to be provide the devil's advocate side of the argument, it's if people go into businesses or other places without protection and are infected, then they could go and infect other people in places like I just mentioned. And that's a legitimate argument to make. The balance is what we're trying to strike here, and that's what the challenge is. But I will not, I don't see a scenario where I would support the passage of an ordinance to write people tickets or arrest them for not wearing a mask in a place that it is strongly encouraged, or if it's mandated by the ordinance, they must do.
Okay. Ed, did you have a comment? I noticed you unmuted.
I did. One of the unintended consequences of doing such an ordinance would be the erosion of the perception of the authority of the health officer. If there's any jurisdiction in Riley County that passes an ordinance that's more strict than what the health officer has already ordered, then they're impugning that authority. And there's also a chance that that whole concept of the health officer is going to be lessened. And I don't think that now is the best time to have that happen. I think that the health officer is the ultimate authority as far as this goes in the county, unless overruled by the Board of Health or the governor. But at this point, I think having something separate from what is already coming out of the incident command team is a disservice. So, and I've been doing this for 25 years, and I already know that the public really doesn't understand what the health officer does. And now's the time that people are learning that, and it's not the best time to pull out the rug. So I just wanted to say that as potentially an unintended consequence.
Okay.
This is Lonnie with Metalurg.
Okay, Lonnie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with everything that was just said there, and my job certainly is to look out for the most at risk, or one of the most at risk populations. An option that I would like for us to explore is some type of voluntary program where businesses can sign up and say, here is the level of protection that we're willing to offer. So the employees of Stony Brook and Metalurg and Dia Christi Village have options of going to places where there's maybe a different level of protection that's provided. We know that we have a pretty long road ahead of us, and one case can certainly cause an outbreak. So as opposed to a citywide or a countywide issue. I think that businesses stepping up and creating that would go a long ways.
Good point. Commissioner McKee, you had, I think you were going to make a comment. Okay. Anybody else?
I agree with what Lonnie said, and last week I approached this from the angle of having the Riley County Health Department to do that grading system that I proposed. But again, the whole, I wasn't proposing it for enforcement purposes. I was proposing it similarly to what Lonnie said, and that is to give the consumer a central area, very similarly to what you've done at the chamber, is to put together a list of where you can get PPE, is that having a list of what safety measures are put in place at these businesses, and allowing the public to decide, okay, do I want to go there or not? If the chamber has the bandwidth to be able to do something like that, I think that would be incredibly impactful for our community.
Okay. Ed, did you?
I did, and I think I told you, Fanny, the last time that I really liked your idea and that it was maybe not feasible, but after thinking about it, well, I'm not changing my mind about that, but we've come up with another idea. I'm trying to coordinate with the EOC to take the governor's order and the Order 7 from the county and combine those, and then by type of business, do a checklist, and then have that basically a self-inspection of the business that says we're doing this, this, and this, posted on their window. Things like what level of PPE, that can be added to that so people would know. So there are options to inform the public ahead of time by doing something like that, which would be, we would create the forms, but they would be the ones committing to whatever it is they check off. And then consumers would see, are they lying? Are they doing exactly what they said? And then they can decide. And I'll tell you what, as the head of the hotline here, word of mouth is how everything is spreading. Somebody finds out there's a case somewhere where I didn't even know yet, and I sit across from the guy that tells me when the cases come in. So yes, I think it's possible, and that format that we're working on potentially could be the format unless something else happens.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. One other thing, and Linda's going to talk in a minute, Linda Cook, that we might think about adding to that even is apartments and rentals. And I know they couldn't post it on the front, but one of the things that's come up is students might be leery of coming back because no one will let them sign less than a 9-month lease. And if there's a business that might, or an apartment complex that might let them get out of that, if something were to happen, that would be obviously something that would be highly sought after. So I think that's another element that we hadn't thought about.
If I may just add one last quick comment, what I described earlier, I had been contacted by Mayor Reddy twice in the last 2 days by email and telephone, and we had a much longer discussion, but I expressed to her my opposition to an ordinance. We had a very respectful conversation, but I just wanted you all to know that I had spoken with her about that. My position is the same that I described to you.
So that brings up, I guess, the key question here, and this is probably for Ron as well. What do we need? Do we need to have some sort of a position? Do we need to just forward our thoughts? What do you think is the expectation of us in dealing with this issue?
Well, the benefit is that we're recording this, so it will be it will be available for folks to view, including commissioners. So we hadn't anticipated this task force taking in official positions, but here's some kind of more pros and cons of the discussion. And so certainly passing that along to the governing bodies would be, and to the EOC group would be appropriate.
Okay. Any other comments? I know we've got a couple other things we need to get to, so maybe just one or two more before we move on.
Just to follow up, Jason, I think we've got here some ideas on best practices. And as Ed mentioned, and I think I said earlier, one of the things we might want to do for the public awareness is, and for the protection of the store, is just to have a little sign there in the window that says PPE required or mask required, whatever it is, so that people can make a choice as they walk down the street.
Yeah, good thought. Other? Okay, well, thank you for those comments, and we'll continue to keep you apprised of where that is going. Two of our really important entities in the region are Kansas State University and Fort Riley, and obviously our two largest employers and the two largest entities in terms of economic impact on our region. And both have made some adjustments recently. Kansas State announced their plans potentially for the fall last week. Fort Riley's made some announcements as well. So we're going to ask Linda and Kelly to update us on those individual entities, and we're going to start, I think, with Linda Cook, and then we'll ask Kelly Pascal to talk about Fort Riley. So Linda.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity, first of all, to participate in the group and to share and donate information. We can all help a path forward for everyone. As you had mentioned, it was on Monday this week that President Myers announced to the university community that based on on the recent guidance coming from the state and local health officials, that the university does intend to resume on-campus operations this semester or in the fall semester. Intend is the key word there, because there are lots of moving parts and a lot of variables that we have to address between now and then as we work on these plans to hopefully bring students back to campus. One thing we do know, it won't be normal that we've known of the past. It could be a hybrid of in-class sessions as well as on-class sessions or online sessions. It could be a combination of people working in offices or working remotely. The decisions are all predicated on the future CDC and state and local health guidelines for social distancing for higher education. So, for us, if the limitation is, no groups larger than 50, that obviously impacts lecture hall classes. So those are the types of things that we're having to consider in our planning, and it also would apply to large events, whether they be cultural or athletic. For the university, we are a large organization. We're more like a city within a city rather than a single business. So that makes the planning for reopening more complex. And we're actually calling it reawakening because we didn't really close. The university still taught classes. It was just done remotely. But we do know for bringing students back, and we're talking a population of nearly 20,000 students, it requires some detailed planning. So we've got a number of teams working on the plans that goes from academic continuity to the overall facility operations, and that gets into how do you clean between classes, how do you separate students for the 6 feet, how do you handle those things on the large scale with the number of buildings we have and the number of classes that we have and the number of students that we have, and how would we host or hold large cultural events in our facilities, and athletics. Athletics is still pondering too. What are the options in that? That planning has to also be coordinated with the Big 12 and NCAA. So there's again a lot of people involved in the decision making and the planning. And our plans also have to take into account that there's a real chance that we could see a resurgence of the virus this fall and in the winter. And with that in mind, there are 2 essential capabilities that we've established that are needed in order to allow the university to move forward. And that's testing capabilities and the contact tracing capabilities. Those are 2 critical things. We're doing a lot of work on that. We're able to do some of the testing on our own facilities, but ramping up to the level of testing you'd need for all the students that we would have back in Manhattan is something that we're really focused on, as well as the contact tracing. We do have some of our guiding principles in this planning is to preserve health and safety of the university as well as the community in, and to be able to maintain and deliver our land grant, and whether it be in the teaching, also our research labs and research extension. We have all those different areas that we're focused on as a university. And we know what we need to preserve and maintain, first of all, our mission critical activities and the mission critical activities that are going to add to the long-term fiscal health of the university. Our plan is a phased approach for reopening. It's the similar phases that you've seen in the White House guidelines, the state guidelines, and local guidelines. And moving through each one of our phases does require certain criteria be met. And there is a potential to move backward if the virus starts to spread in the area. But I won't go into the phases. They're on our website, but they're similar to the phases that you've seen in all the health department guidelines. We're still working on the plans. There's nothing specific yet. There are just so many variables for us to consider. And each day we monitor the spread of the virus around the world, what's going on in the US, what's going on in Kansas, and what's going on in Rowan County, as well as Geary and Potawatomi County, and then the other counties where we have campuses. So we're staying really tuned to the spread of the virus and seeing what's happening and if it's going up, going down. And above all else, we recognize that we have to be really flexible in our planning and be ready to pivot in any direction if that's required. So that's just kind of a synopsis of where we are with the planning. But the goal is hopefully to get people back on campus in the fall. Very safe manner.
Thank you, Linda. I think
I would say, by the way, the supply issue is a concern for us too. I mean, when you start to talk about face masks for students, our guidance right now, again, but we have limited operations on the campus, is it's highly recommended. And if you are going to be within 6 feet or operating where your job requires you to operate closely with each other, then it is required. But only in those. But we look at too, if all of a sudden we're bringing 20,000 more people in here, that supply chain for getting masks and other sanitation supplies and things will be critical, and we're already starting to work on that.
So I think we'll open it up for questions. I'll ask the first one. Are we going to get PowerCat face masks at some point?
We'd love to.
Okay.
We'll work on it. There are some out there.
Questions?
I see something on the chat. What's on the chat?
I think Lisa was just.
Oh, okay. She got her. Yes.
Linda, I had a question. So I was reading the Mercury synopsis of the plan, and there was a statement there about the June 15th deadline and a vaccine being developed by June 15th.
Well, that's not anything that's coming specifically out of our leadership group.
Okay.
And we're watching. I mean, we have researchers working on vaccines, but and we can only rely on what we see from different health organizations.
Yeah.
It seems like a vaccine is months to a year out there.
Okay, that's what I thought. It was a strange sentence. I was just asking. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, probably inaccurate.
Other questions?
Oh yeah, it was hung up.
Well, I'll ask one other then, and you may not be able to answer, but what is there a current status at all about football season? And I know they're looking at a lot of different options, but is there anything specific? Who makes that decision? Obviously, Kansas State can't randomly say we're going to play football. I mean, you have to have people to play, right? So,
right.
Who ultimately is responsible for that?
That decision is, Dean Taylor, athletic directors, in conversations daily with the Big 12 and NCAA. So they're doing lots of scenario planning. And I don't want to get out and talk in front of them, but there are a number of scenarios that are being planned, but, and again, I haven't said anything specific yet for the fall. Some things where it could be a later season. a lot of different alternatives. You know, the part of it would be is if and when they decide a season would start, you know, that you got X number of weeks, and that's kind of controlled by the Big 12 is bringing your athletes in. Like, I don't know, but there's a certain number of weeks that you bring the athletes back in, and there's a certain amount of time you can't bring them in too. So it'd be playing around that, but they're looking out for the health of the players as well as spectators. So I wish I could give you the crystal ball. That's what everybody wants because there's so much from an economic impact standpoint, but just no answers yet.
And again, obviously it's not a K-State decision, it's a larger.
Right.
Because you have to have.
12 and NCAA have a lot of control over that.
Okay.
Jason, this is Mickey Dean, and I've been listening. I had a question for Linda. I raised my hand, but it must not be showing. Linda, have you done any kind of a survey or some kind of something polling the students to see what their thoughts are and timing, et cetera? I mean, is there any kind of that information that you've been gathering? I'm sure you probably have.
Well, we are, and there's all sorts of research going on in the academic world about students' decisions to go on to higher education. We're seeing, we're faced some budget scenario planning that is going to be based on lower enrollment than we had planned. I think it's what Jason had alluded to earlier was one of the deciding factors for some students that we're hearing is, I can't, if for some reason we can't come back, I can't afford to have that apartment lease. So maybe I'm going to decide now that I'm going to lay out a year. So definitely between parents and the students, there's some indecisiveness because of the just not knowing what the health situation will be. That's why, there'll always be the online option. But there is a hesitancy and concern about what the virus will do. So we're seeing that nationwide, not just at K-State, but yes, it's impacting enrollment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Jason.
In the state of Kansas, on the 15th of June, if everything goes according to current plan, is it in the guidance to continue to have social distancing and masks at that point?
Are you referring to like community or statewide or?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, my understanding from reading phase 4 is that, you go from a gathering of 90 at June 1 to on June 15th, essentially what she said was we will be back at near normal. So I'm just trying to figure out, if you're planning or we're all planning to try to have a still social distancing and masking requirement of some kind after the 15th of June, phase 4.
Yeah, I don't know. When you look at some of the modeling on the health, where you see, and there are a number of models out there that show the number of positive cases, and Bob, you can probably talk more to it. Some of those will take us out into July. To me, it's hard to predict that by June 15th, it's really hard to say things will be better by June 15th based on the phasing, because at any point we could move backwards to if there are flare-ups in any location. And when you start to move people, like we would be moving students in from everywhere. So that transition of people can also create impacts on what's going on with the virus, which is why testing is important to us.
So who's 7769294?
Yeah, this is Julie Govert-Walter, and my question related to testing, I am just wondering what, if any, plans the university or perhaps even Ed can tell us about plans from the community for using tests for people who are either coming into the community or people who are already here to determine the extent of the coronavirus, after we do testing. I think that's I hear a lot about some communities not doing any testing and some communities doing more. And of course, the more you test, it appears, the more cases you end up having on the record. Anyway, I'm just curious as to what thinking about testing, particularly in light of students returning to Manhattan, what kind of thinking is in process right now?
Well, for us, it's one of two essentials: testing capabilities and the contact tracing. We have to be able to test students. We screen and know if they've had or don't have it. We don't know. That's part of our planning process. But all of a sudden, if students start to get sick, testing and tracing has to be important, because now all of a sudden, if you have a student in a classroom with 30 people, you have to figure out how you are going to quarantine those people and how you contact and trace all the other people that they've been in contact. And when you're in the university environment, you're in contact with a lot of people. So getting the testing kits, getting the materials for the testing is something that we're definitely looking at. I mean, we're not sure that there is sufficient testing for us right now. We just don't know.
And on the health department and the public health, and it's very difficult to tell what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months because of those same reasons that Linda mentioned. Also, KDHE at this point only allows, for their lab anyway, to send in tests that are from people who have symptoms. They've actually increased the number of symptoms that are allowable, but that's still going to be not as many people as it would be if it were the general public or students coming back to school. I did want to mention to Mr. Dotson's comment about social distancing. In the governor's order, it kind of leaves the impression that the amount of time that's going to be required is indeterminate based on whatever they see happen, and maybe they're just kind of preparing for the fall that way. I don't see anything about masks though, but they did mention social distancing being required or recommended for the foreseeable future.
I think that I noticed that in the county chart, you know, the one that went along with the guidance.
Yes.
That it has K through 12 and higher ed shown in red even during phase 4. So it seemed to me to be a little bit of a difference between what we plan to do given the criteria for entering phase 4 and what the governor's guidance had in it.
Yes. A lot of it's very difficult for the incident command team to kind of make, plan. We got the same experience where we didn't really know what was going to happen in this first phase until a day or two after the governor's order was out. It's difficult to kind of get a jump on that. And especially with schools, even though the state might allow them to be open, that doesn't necessarily mean the local school districts are going to have the same plan. So
okay.
I did want to mention that about what I thought I read in the governor's order also for social distancing.
All right.
And some businesses have asked that. Are we going to have to social distance after phase 4? And that's the answer we're giving them, is for the foreseeable future until something is more committed. So
Ron's going to, I think, have something to say. Then we're going to move on to Kelly because we still have quite a bit to get to. So
just real quick on the point, obviously the governor's recommendations, still have several counties that don't have any cases confirmed. So the guidelines are going to be different across the state, and that's been one of our challenges. A good example of that is the Kansas City area extended the stay-at-home order a week because of their circumstances. And so, the governor's directions are going to be guidelines, and our own circumstances may dictate that we do something else or something more restrictive, and the governor's orders have allowed for that. So those are a good reason for this committee to have recommendations to the command team to be able to, and the health officer to be able to make some of those determinations.
Great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you and your folks being on our task force. So why don't you talk about what's going on at Fort Riley?
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again. Like I had said earlier, we greatly appreciate being included as well. not just for, Fort Riley to be able to let you know kind of what we're doing, but also to know what's going on all around in the Flint Hills, which of course is, home to so many of our soldiers and their families. Fortunately, Steve and Colonel Kelly were able to join us, and they're our subject matter experts who have really just been doing the yeoman's work of, for those who have been onto it. If you haven't, I highly recommend the Fort Riley main webpage. They have a coronavirus link in their own website that has really frequently asked questions, town halls, which are also being streamed on Facebook, just like all of the rest of our Flint Hills partners, trying to stay up with communication as this is changing all of the time. And so with that, I will turn it over to Colonel Kelly and Steve to give an update on the latest and greatest for Fort Riley.
Okay, this is Colonel Kelly. Can I get a thumbs up if you guys can hear me now?
I got it.
Okay. We had a little trouble with the headset earlier, so I apologize for that. So it sounds like I'm transmitting now. Well, like Kelly said, really appreciate being a part of the conversation today. I'll make a few remarks, and Steve's going to point out a couple things, and then we can talk to any questions the group may have. For Linda Cook and the community, I'll start off by saying we are all very hopeful here at Fort Riley that we'll have Wildcat football this fall, and we'll have another great Fort Riley Day at Bill Snyder Family Stadium. So that's something we're looking forward to. Of course, if that can't happen because of the restrictions, we would certainly understand that. But that's just something we're all crossing our fingers hoping for right now. Steve Elstrom just dropped a link in the chat to the webpage that Kelly Pascoe just mentioned. That's been one of our main communication tools to put out, whether it's our frequently asked questions, some of General Kolashevsky's notes to the community and to the leaders here on Fort Riley. So that's a great place to look. Linda Cook also mentioned her term reawakening. One of the terms we're using here on Fort Riley now is required readiness. And so, if you've listened to either some of the town halls or received some of our community updates, while the Army and the Department of Defense have greatly curtailed a lot of our actions, we still have the mission to defend the nation and to support our civil authorities. And we have seen a couple teams from Fort Riley go out to Detroit, to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, to help with some of the areas, some of the logistics and contracting concerns. We have some other units that are on notice. They could be called up should an emergency arise or a greater emergency arise, either here in the homeland or overseas. Over the last week, we've been very tied in. Greatly appreciate the dialogue with both the state and the county offices. General Kolashevsky has been very adamant and very eager to make sure that Fort Riley stays in step with the region. We are a part of the region, so we fully understand that as these restrictions and precautions, we need to be a part of those as well. And so, for example, just on Monday, he had me distribute to all our commanders the county chart on how they were implementing that. He wanted to make sure he discussed this in our commanders update meeting that a lot of the senior staff and commanders are on twice a week. And so that's one example of where he really wants to make sure. And so he's actually distributing your products to our leaders as well. And so, if there's any questions or anything you want to make sure Fort Riley people are seeing, please, pass that on to us, or, myself, Steve Elstrom, Kelly Pascoe, we're really your entry point to Fort Riley. So, be sure any questions or concerns you have here. Hey, another point General Kolashevsky has made repeatedly in the past week, as he's talking to our soldiers, our families, our DA civilians and contractors, is that now's not the time for complacency. Every day, just as you are, we're looking at where the state of Kansas is. We're watching these numbers just as you are. And so we want to make sure that even as we maintain our required military readiness, we're doing so in accordance with the community and the best practices that are out there. General Kolashevsky did update his order, the stay-at-home directive, so to speak. So we have seen, some lessening of restrictions, but for the most part, as Kansas is in phase 1, we're really mirroring that. So we are allowing some smaller groups. We're allowing some increased activity, but really we are still maintaining all the protective postures, the use of PPE. So you asked about K-State themed masks. I've got an Army themed mask, so the purple doesn't really work with our uniforms, but I wish I could have a K-State mask on there. But yeah, so we're absolutely maintaining that here on Fort Riley, our hand washing stations, our hygiene teams, and to the mask, these are required on Fort Riley. You cannot walk into the PX or the commissary without one. In work centers, such as where I am right now, I'm allowed to have it off because I'm not within 6 feet of anyone. Steve Elstrom is more than 6 feet away from me right now. So those are some of the things we're doing here. Another point he's making, General Kolashevsky's making, is that the majority of our people are a part of, especially Manhattan and Junction City, but all the surrounding counties. And so his expectation and our expectation of our soldiers, our civilians, our families, is when they are in these communities, they are abiding by the physical distancing, the PPE, the other precautions that are in place. So you should not have any trouble with Fort Riley people not adhering to those while they're in your areas. And of course, please let us know what you're seeing and if we can be of more assistance there. As we do go through the phases of reopening, we do have a process in place here that we are evaluating facilities, looking at our ability to protect the people based on the current situation and the current numbers in the state. So we have a board of subject matter experts that's working that throughout the week. And then at an appointed time, certain facilities are being nominated, as we call it in the military, to the commanding general, but he is the authority for, say, opening a facility that we had shut down. So we're looking at those very carefully, based on especially if we are going to have, say, more soldiers training because of a mission we need to be ready to meet, we might need to counterbalance that in other ways. So that is a daily and weekly process we are looking at here. But along with Kansas being in phase 1, we've not seen a dramatic, we haven't opened up a lot of facilities as opposed to where we were last week. So one last point, I actually want to turn it over to Steve Elstrom to make one last point about some of our outreach through the Chambers of Commerce, and then we can open up to any questions the group may have. So Steve.
Can you hear me? Thumbs up. All right. So I don't have much in the chat. I did drop a second link. That is to a set of remarks that Colonel Stephen Schrader, the garrison commander, made yesterday to the Manhattan Military Relations Committee. Copy of those remarks are archived on the Manhattan Military Relations Committee Facebook page. And on May 18, he's looking forward to participation in the Junction City's virtual chamber update as well. So tune into that if you can, to either one, to hear a more comprehensive report elaborating on the points that Colonel Kelly just talked. Open to questions.
You're going to get off easy, Colonel Kelly.
All right.
Thanks
So-
again, and I saw that Christy also dropped the links onto the Region Reimagine page. So thanks again for the support, and we appreciate being part of it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christy.
Well, thank you guys very much. So one of the things we wanted to have time for today is, one of our main focus or goals of the group is to provide some feedback. So the 3 local health officers do continue to kind of work on, one, making sure there's understanding of what we're currently doing, but again, looking ahead. And so there's 3 questions that we wanted to talk about today. So I thought we'd maybe take 12 minutes with each of those. The first being, there's currently travel restrictions, recommendations.
30 minutes?
And so one of the questions is, should the communities have any travel restrictions or recommendations, or should future notices just be silent on that topic?
That's on
The governor has said that we could consider reducing or eliminating unnecessary travel anywhere. And we do currently have some travel restrictions in place. For example, like with Riley County, they've got travel restrictions for their own staff. We do that in the healthcare arena as well.
Then Ron,
So maybe just some conversation around, are the travel restrictions helpful? And what would be our input or thoughts for going forward?
less, I would say I'm like less.
So thoughts about the travel restrictions going forward?
Dean McKee, there won't be any on our side. Except individual offices making, like county people together wear masks and stuff like that, but too big an area to try and control.
This is Mickey Dean. I tend to agree with Dee.
Bob, doesn't the governor already have some travel restrictions that we ought to review? I mean, there's about 7 states, I think.
Correct.
When you come
Yeah.
back, you have to have quarantine, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, and this is not in the context of travel within our counties. This really is a question about, and this is part of, quite honestly, it's giving feedback to K-State as well. It's giving feedback to Fort Riley as well. It's giving feedback to those of us who have people who move around the state or out of our state fairly routinely. Because we will need to abide by whatever the governor has in place. And at this point, there are a number of states. We don't know when states will be taken off the list. And in April, there were actually states added onto the list. But again, just kind of just to get some feedback back to our 3 health officers about what we think might be appropriate going forward.
Fort Riley, as you may know, I don't think they said this, but they went from a 50-mile radius to a 250 just, I think, on Friday. And I think they've also got some specific places like the governor mentioned as well.
So other feedback or input?
This is Julie Govert Walter, and I am I to understand that if somebody from, let's say, one of the travel restricted states would come to this area, would the expectation be that they would be quarantined for 2 weeks?
Yes.
That's how it's supposed to work, yes.
Okay, thanks.
And again, I think, organizations can actually go past that or make it more strict individually as organizations. But that is the state expectation at this point.
Well, I'll just say this, that since our region serves 18 counties, we have a few counties that have asked staff from our agency office here in Manhattan that, well, we really don't want you to come to our meeting because you're from Riley County and you have all this virus stuff. So I'm just saying it sort of works that
Both
way
ways.
also. So just saying, just reporting in on that.
I just want to say for the health department and the hotline, we're using the recommendations from the CDC and KDHE at this point. though, travel from different states and international travel.
I would say that at K-State that we're following whatever the state and local guidelines are for travel. Obviously our travel is restricted now too, but as people start to come back and they go to conferences or, there'll be international travel. It's what are the guidelines? And we know that'll be specific to countries you go to and the states that still might be limited. So it's how do we plan and prepare our operations around it?
I think as much as possible mirroring what the guidance is from the state level, and then looking at what's happening and getting that guidance from our local health department makes the most sense to me. Again, with keeping in mind what Director Butler said about compliance, is that out of all of this, we need to have public buy-in and know that they can make sense of it for why they're doing what they're being asked to do. And I think if we get too far beyond what that guidance is from the state health department or the state with Secretary Norman and with our local health department for what we're seeing here locally as a governmental or as a community here, aside from what local businesses can do or local organizations can do with their own employees themselves, I think we would kind of go a bit astray of what we could do successfully.
So second topic, current order has limited restaurant capacity at 50% occupancy. As we get ready, because we're still, what is today, the 7th, so we're 11 days away from a potential move to that next phase. I guess feedback from the group or input around what's been your experience around that? Has that kind of worked? Should we look at an increase past that? What seems like the appropriate next steps to take?
Are you talking about the restaurant industry in particular, the restaurant and bar industry in particular, or?
So, well, that was specifically called out in the last order. So that's why we want to kind of circle back on that. Just to see again what people's feedback have been and what seems to be the next kind of logical phase to take.
I've heard, Dee, again, that from our side, that half of the occupancy doesn't really make it function financially. And that's a concern because they have to staff full-time person for half the service sometimes, and our restaurants are all small, so I'm not sure where they'll land, but it does have an impact to try and open, but not necessarily be able to serve whatever their usual style is, which is a consideration.
Yeah. Gina or Dennis, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I have some thoughts I can contribute to this. You're probably really aware that in downtown, we've just kind of gone very, very cautiously and very conservatively. We have really only one or two maybe restaurants that are open. The others are either waiting. We have a couple that have set dates of opening next week, I believe on Wednesday, and then we have some that are just waiting and watching. It's a very cautious. We've always been sort of a very careful group. So I think that the occupancy, 50% occupancy, is definitely plays into our restaurants' health and well-being when the time comes that the consumers are confident. right now, I think it's kind of balanced itself out just because we don't have a lot of consumers yet feeling, you know, that they can or that they want to necessarily go to a dining room at this moment. Everything is day by day for us. Certainly when there is better consumer confidence and we get a little bit further day by day, week by week, as we get down the road, we can't have occupancy limitations on our restaurants. It's very difficult, especially when you are asking for 6 feet between tables. So in some of those spaces, like Dee was saying, it's not even financially doable because you're down to just a few tables. So probably no matter what orders come out, we'll still continue to be just a little bit more cautious than the order, which is a good thing. But once consumer confidence gets going, I think you'll see us react a little bit differently.
Say Dennis or Kara. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah. Well, you know, in Aggieville, we have had really only one place so far that as a restaurant that's reopened to inside. You know, our smaller places, you know, between the 6 foot and the 50%, it is not a functional thing for them. One of the things we talked about, you know, I guess I had said before, is the 50% thing is certainly very arbitrary and it doesn't really work for us. We do have some places that will open up next week, and that will help us out a little bit. But I think working with more general terms of 6 feet, you know, and spreading out the tables and doing all that, I think that works in the short term. But I think putting a number on it with occupancy, like I had said before, once you do that, then somebody's going to have to enforce it, and you've already established a fine for it, and that seems like a system that we don't even need to be involved with. You know, in restaurants, people kind of wander around a little bit, and I think all that we just have to take into consideration who these people are, and they're doing the best that they can. I would just say that as we move forward, if we get away from percentages and hard numbers like that, the better off we are. We can ask them to voluntarily stay with social distancing, and everybody's going to do the right thing. I really believe that, and because right now people are just scared to reopen.
You know, and I would concur with you know, with what both Gina and Dennis have said. You know, there's just no way that, you know, restaurants can survive on 50% occupancy. You know, whether you're little or you're small. It also, you know, just isn't financially feasible. You know, many times for restaurants to, you know, when we have to rely on, you know, an 85 to 90% occupancy rate, you know, just to even make, you know, ends meet. You know, when, you know, an establishment such as, you know, ours, you know, Labco, you know, our business thrives on accommodating large parties. So, you know, it just doesn't make any sense for us to even think about opening before June 1 or maybe even June 15th or maybe July 1st. You know, we're just kind of in a quandary of, you know, of how we're going to be able to move forward on a very limited, you know, ability of and, you know, percentage of occupancy. So, you know, but we just can't afford, you know, if we open up and, you know, try to give it a shot and all of a sudden, you know, we have to close down again for 2 weeks. I mean, quite frankly, we're done, you know, we're closed forever. And, you know, that's just how, you know, that's just what the reality is. And, you know, so both Russ and I, you know, have to view of kind of move forward very cautiously, and you know, just you know, can't function without having, you know, the ability to have, you know, a larger capacity, you know, 85 to 90% at least, you know, if not 100%. So. Yeah, and so that's my comment.
This is Karen Hibbard, and I just want to reiterate what both Gina and Dennis and Kelly have said. From the industry that I have visited with, I can confidently say that they all want to do it. It's cautiousness on both parts, from the hospitality industry to do it right, as well as for the consumer to do it right as well. So I think that there's an eagerness, but there's also a hesitancy. So for us to bounce back immediately, it's going to be in increments that we see the hospitality business coming back.
So Kara or Mickey, do you have some thoughts from either Gary or Pot County?
I'm sorry, I had to answer an email real quick. It's important, Bob. So please ask the question again. This is Mickey.
We were talking about the restaurant occupancy and what might the next step be from the 50%, just kind of thoughts or feedback.
Right now, I will tell you from our restaurants, just what we've heard on the chamber side is they're just tickled to death to get the 50. As a matter of fact, we just had one call a little while ago again, making sure that they could open up, on the 18th to go up to that point. So, I mean, I think gradual buildup, as long as they can keep moving forward and they don't step back, is a good thing. We also have our restaurants here locally, 2 or 3 of them have taken pretty extreme measures in making sure that people are distanced. One in particular literally put up plywood walls between every single one of their booths, took out numbers of tables and et cetera, just so that they are kind of complying or being overly cautious. So, I have not heard a ton of feedback yet, other than just the fact that they're glad that they can kind of start opening some and having some restrictions. So I don't know if that's very helpful, but that's what I've heard.
So third question. So the governor's plan for the next phase is kind of goes beyond, it goes to more public gathering concept, would change the maximum number from 10 to 30. And I guess just again, questions, or we need to get some feedback to all of our 3 health officers does that seem appropriate? Is anybody concerned about moving to 30 potentially on the 18th? Or is everybody comfortable with that? Think that that's okay? Because this would be kind of across the board.
This is Mickey again. I think what we've been discussing here locally, and I can't speak for our health department, but I know they're not on, but what we've been here discussing is we go to the 30 and we let groups kind of pick their own comfort level. I'll just use my own organization as an example. After that date and time, we would have a board meeting, which would be held on the 28th or 21st, of which it would exceed, or it wouldn't exceed 30 people. It would be under the 30, but it's in a conference room that's not, you really couldn't distance real well. We made the choice that we're still canceling all of our committee meetings for the month of May. But what I'm kind of hearing in the community is we're allowing our people to be good stewards and understand what's best for them at this point in regards to that 30, whether they're comfortable or they're not.
Hey, Bob, one of the best practices coming out of another area is regardless of the group size, if people take a little bit of care on who they're inviting, in other words, if it's a group of close friends or people they know pretty well, the safety factor is probably improved over just kind of a gathering of random people.
Other thoughts? And Dennis Butler, it's okay if you drop off. That's cool. Gina?
Yeah. I just wanted to just express that I really want us to do the move from 10 to 30 really well as a community, as a district, but as a whole, I would like to see us do this together with, I'm always harping on that communication piece. So I'd love to see some really simple communication come out about that, because and this is in my interest, I will throw that out there. We would love to be able to have some smaller outdoor, we'd like to have our 30-year-long tradition of dog days sidewalk sales. And if we have to move it into the fall, I get that, but just would love to be in a position where we have done this right. We've not burdened our hospitals. We've had, the spike is over. We're on the downward side. We're taking care of each other. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing, so that we can get to the point where we can have a sale where you can walk around on the sidewalk and everybody's aware of each other and each other's space. So that's really my thoughts on that. I just would like to see us transition in each step carefully, cautiously, conscientiously, but also with some good communication coming from somewhere about clearly what is allowed, especially when the students return. Thank you.
Maybe a little bit of perspective from the school district and what we're doing might be helpful in this conversation along that same lines too. We've made some tough decisions recently about what programming we'll be offering over the summer. There are some programs that probably technically we could do, but as we've been thinking through and as our administration has been thinking through what our end goal is, kind of along the lines of what Gina was saying just now, our end goal is that we want our 6,500 students to be able to have the best opportunity to go back to school in the school buildings on August 12th. And so when thinking through what that meant for us over the summer with what our summer programming looked like, it ultimately was the decision for us that we were not going to offer any in-person opportunities for summer activities. The only programming that we're offering are things that are going to be able to be done online and digitally. Technically, could it have been possible for us to do some small sites of 10 or 30 or small groups along the way? Possibly, yes. But if we ended up doing that and then having something go wrong, we could really be benefiting ourselves in the short term, but harming a larger number of students and families for the long term when we're talking about what that goal is for the fall. The same question comes up when we are making the decision about our sports that are coming up. CASHA, which is the governing body for student athletics for high school, middle school students, they met on Friday and gave some guidance and changed their restrictions or made some rule changes that allowed schools and districts to start their summer athletic programming on June 1st. So it kind of opened up the gates and said, you can start your summer stuff on June 1st. And but districts could make the decision locally. Administrators, superintendents, or school boards can make the decisions locally to not allow that, to take it at whatever pace they wanted. And we have chosen, and some other districts in our area are also choosing to take that slower pace. And July 1st is our time frame for when the soonest that we will allow summer sports activities to start. So like that conditioning for fall football or for volleyball, those sorts of events. And again, it's that concept of does it hurt and is it hard for us to slow things down, and do we want to get things started? Sure. But keeping in mind what that long-term goal of being successful is kind of what's our guiding principle right now. So I think that proceed with caution that I'm hearing from Gina and that downtown group kind of just resonates with me. And I think it mirrors or it matches up well with what we're taking as our perspective as a school district.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay.
Linda, or I did have one question on moving through these phases, and I forgot. I've seen too many phase criteria. Does the criteria also require that the state positive test rate be flat or going down? So I mean, so if Kansas's total number of positive cases is going up, doesn't that stop us from moving into the next phase?
I am looking right now on the site.
I was trying to find it too, and I couldn't find it.
Say Ed or Ron, do you want to respond?
I'll let Ed chime in first, but I think obviously there's some variability there. Again, I think local conditions can dictate otherwise unless the governor overrules it and is more restrictive.
I'm getting information from the sidelines over here. So I'm going to introduce Andrew Adams. So he's going to tell you what he's heard the latest. So the question again was about whether or not the increase or decrease or flat line of positive rates is going to be a determining factor. Was that the question?
Right.
Move to phase 2.
Everybody. So on a webinar with the state this morning, they had talked about formulating and getting ready to finalize their testing strategy statewide. I don't know what that'll look like yet. They didn't give a whole lot of details. They did say they were looking at hopefully getting to having 2% of the state population tested by the end of May. And so we're well on our way to that right now. But I'm not sure, if they're looking for anything in terms of, oh, we need no new cases, or we need this, or we need that. I know looking at the trends statewide from this morning, the overall percent positives compared to total testing has been on a downward trend the last couple of weeks. Anything that's reported on the state website, though, they wanted to make sure was known that there's a 5-day lag. So they aren't including the most recent 5 days in that reporting because they know how quickly things can change and that there's a slight delay in terms of reporting those cases. But I think there's more to come on that from the state level in terms of what they want this test strategy to be and what that'll mean moving forward. Thanks.
Good. Well,
the Ad Astra plan, weren't there 3 separate criteria? So stable or declining total new cases, decrease in hospital admissions, and decrease in total number of deaths?
Those are the 3 criteria.
D again, and I just wanted to say that checking with the commissioners out in Ford County where I grew up, and their numbers are high, but it's because they're testing everybody. So there's going to be a different way of looking at that data when they have picked up people who have had it but not had any manifestation of the illness. That will be probably in a future consideration as well.
Good points. Okay, a couple more items, and then because we're reaching the 4 o'clock hour. I just wanted to go back. I know we talked a little bit about it, but one of the questions that I think has come up a number of times is what can we do as a community to restore consumer confidence? And I know Gina in particular has hit on it a couple of times here. We did throw out a few ideas. I think earlier when we were discussing the mask issue. Is there anything that we didn't touch on in that conversation that someone here thinks is an important item to consider when thinking about, quite frankly, just getting people comfortable to be out shopping and eating and just generally visiting our facilities?
I really like the idea of a checklist, a postable checklist. Easy, quick, very graphic and visual that could be right outside of a building or a business or any organization. They would probably have to be formatted a little bit differently for each type of establishment, but I think that would be a great way for somebody to just quickly glance and say, oh yeah, these people they're doing these things. And of course it's self-reported But a lot of this is on the honor system. A lot of this is us choosing to do the right things. But I think that could build confidence with going into an establishment and doing some business. I think that was a great idea.
Jason, one of the things that might help psychologically is most of the news reports the number of reported cases, and by the way they do this, they increase every day. In other words, you add what you found today to what came before, and so now we get the total of the state, which is an ever-growing number. The more important number is the one that is the change. And if you notice in the reporting that's coming out of the county, like today or yesterday, perhaps, we have 55 cases. And of those, I think it's 21 has been resolved. So the important thing for a consumer or the citizens to know is that we've got only about 30 cases that are currently active. I think seeing that number continue to grow doesn't cause people too much feeling of safety. So we might want to just think about the way we report the numbers to people.
Point.
That would be, and I agree with Mike on that one. It would be good if they would say we have this many active cases and 4 in the hospital, because many active cases are not even in our county being treated in the medical setting. It's just simply quarantined, and that helps an awful lot for people to see that some have cured, especially, or you might say past active. We get that report, but those numbers would give confidence.
Okay, Gina.
Yeah, I want to definitely agree with Mike and Lisa and Dee. And I always agree with Lisa because she's a communicator. So it's, I want to also let you know that it is part of the business requirements that came out from the county that signage be on the doors. So when you are downtown, you will, for any business that's open, you will walk to a door that has the CDC stop, and then it has a checklist of everything that, fever, cough, that kind of thing. And then secondarily to that, most businesses have posted on their doors what the expectations are, whether they are by appointment only, whether they require a mask, whether they their doors are actually locked, but they are 1 in, 1 out. So I think it's, if you're strolling downtown, which I did yesterday, it was really great to see how I was going to enter that business. It was very clear. So I think that's taken care of for us downtown. I do like the suggestion many hours ago from Lonnie, I think it was, about maybe compiling a voluntary list of safety measures that are taking place in businesses. Of course, that would have to be strictly voluntary. We already have a very up-to-date COVID business practices or business operation list on our front page of our website, and it would be very easy for us to add what some of those measures are, or what the safety measures are in some of our businesses. I think, Lonnie, that was a great suggestion, and we will certainly put that out to our businesses. But I just wanted you all to know that if you come downtown, you will be greeted in nearly every instance with instructions on the door. So just wanted to let you know that.
This is Cheryl. I wanted to say that as we draft the communication, it's important that we continue to make the community, customers and so forth, aware of the need to continue to use safety precautions. And as Commissioner Dodson was saying, we're going to share with them the numbers that things are going better, but also emphasize that because people are being careful and wearing masks and using the sanitizing procedures, that's why the numbers are looking better, so that they don't feel like, well, okay, everything's great, so we're back to normal. So I think in that message, just communicating, here's the positive changes we've seen, but it is because of the awareness and the safety measures that are in place and people are abiding by.
Ed, you unmuted. Did you have?
I did. One of the ideas that we kind of came up with here at the health department was featuring Julie eating out the first time in the community as a way to build up confidence, go with, because we've had discussions about, as health department employees, should we go here, should we go there, just because of the perception that leads to somebody who wouldn't even wear their health department jacket because, well, first off, they were going to be inundated by questions. And second off, they weren't sure that they were supposed to be there. So having the health officer do something like going out for lunch at a business and maybe doing a Facebook Live or something like that might help.
Okay. Anybody else?
One possibility, and I don't know whether it would work for everybody, but when we talked to the county health nurses and they talked about daycare having just 10 kids in the same classroom with the same teacher to keep track of them, the reason was because if there was one of them 2 days later that had the illness, they'd know who needed to be contacted. And I don't know if taking restaurant reservations at some places where they're going to have a larger group, if they would just have the phone number, or I don't really want to identify and trace everybody, but a timeline on this hour, these are the people that were there and these were there, so that if there was a trace needed, they would able to contact them without any keeping of the record beyond maybe the 5 to 6 days or whatever it needed to be. But it's merely a suggestion. I'm not sure how to manage it in small groups. Maybe it isn't necessary, but the biggest problem is if somebody was in that restaurant and had the problem, the question of tracing and making certain that everybody that might have been there could be contacted. Think on it. I'm not sure how you'd exactly do it, but it is not impossible to do it with just some enter in and sign in, please, kind of thing for a while. I'm out of here.
Well, I do think it's important that we keep just thinking about things like that, or are there either handy hints or ideas that can be shared initially, obviously within our task force, but then to the other constituents that you guys represent from your different industries. So I think that's helpful. We've got, I think, 13 minutes left. There were a couple other things we just want to make sure. Specifically want to go back to some of the conversation around PPE. Obviously, very blessed last week when we get the 2,000 masks from Champion. Those have been distributed. We've got information on the Chamber and Region Reimagined website about other vendors and suppliers for materials. Are there other either questions that people have, or are there other resources that we could get for people that would be helpful for them in relationship to personal protective equipment?
It's not personal protective equipment necessarily, but it's the requirement for everybody to have hand sanitizer accessible to the public and their employees. And I did a walkthrough of a couple stores yesterday that I was shopping at anyway, and most of them did not have that. And whether it's because they just didn't have it because it's not available, or they hadn't gotten that far yet, I don't know. But that's not an easy commodity to come by. So that is something that you might look at as another thing to deal with.
Gina?
Yeah, we ended up having to source our own. I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but we were able to work with a local winery. I'm sure you've seen wineries and distilleries that are putting out the 80% alcohol for spray bottles and whatnot. So we're going to pick up cases of that tomorrow and just to make sure that at least everybody has a bottle of hand sanitizer. My understanding is you can also turn it into wipes with shop paper towels. They're the heavy duty paper towels. And also you can put it in a spray bottle and sanitize your equipment, your point of sale equipment and whatnot, your countertops. So we're going to try that because it's been obviously very hard to get any of those supplies locally. And then thankfully, we've got some businesses down here that are, and just community members who are giving us masks of the cloth sort. I just got some today from Mary Ann Butler, Commissioner Butler's wife. She dropped them off for our downtown businesses. So we're just trying to source it on our own and see what we can do, but we would love to have better resources and better ways of getting these kinds of supplies.
This is Julie Gobert Walter, and I just want to echo what was just said. It is really challenging to find hand sanitizer, and I also will add to the list thermometers, the kind that you use on your forehead. I think that's another need that needs to be put on the list, because I think that's going to become, if it's not already, more important. I will also say that I saw something, I think it was on the CDC website a week or so ago, that said that soap and water were as highly recommended as hand sanitizer, but of course hand sanitizer is more convenient. So I just put that out for the good of our cause.
Yeah. Actually, when this all kind of started back in March, one of our physicians commented that all the hand sanitizer was gone, but at that point you could still buy a bar of soap. And soap and water actually is very effective with COVID. You can wash your hands with that, do your 20 seconds, just like everything else, but it's actually very effective. Dennis, were you say something?
Yeah. There is a limited amount of supplies, and I know that's very difficult for people, but I did visit. I know we talked earlier about where are things available, and I did visit with a local business today in BD4 Distributing, and they've actually got somebody locally. He's going to be making the hand sanitizer stands that will hold the bag hand sanitizer that's touchless, and they're starting to take orders for those. And that's something that's going to be needed to be out there. But we do have some local businesses, and even though they may not be a regular retail business, they are local people, and they are making. They've got some of the things that we need, and they've found another local supplier to actually build these hand sanitizer stands. So I would recommend that as everybody is starting to move forward, get in contact, place an order, because these things won't come immediate. They don't have a stockpile, but they're taking orders now. I think it's huge.
Hey, Bob, is maybe what is the availability of gloves? Is that just like hand sanitizer being prioritized to medical facilities?
At least our experience has been so far, acquiring gloves, as long as they're not some sort of specialty glove, has not been as difficult as the other products. The sanitation products are actually an issue for all of us, I think. And part of, we use larger quantities too, but that actually has been a challenge for our supply chain folks. Gloves so far have not been. I know we're kind of getting close here again. A couple people had mentioned childcare, summer camps, things like that. I guess, what are we, as task force members, what are you hearing about childcare centers being in operation? I know there are limitations about cohorting. That probably makes sense, but I guess what's everybody hearing around that?
One of the reasons I asked that question earlier, Bob, was because as we get people back to normal work, the child care service requirement will rise. I think right now we're probably meeting it, but I just asked particularly for Christy and Dennis to keep an eye on that, so that if we perceived a shortage, we could suggest maybe some workarounds.
So we are scheduled again to meet next Thursday on the 14th. That'll be 4 days before the potential next phase. are there areas of concern or things that we want to make sure we get on our agenda for next week?
One of the areas I hadn't heard about is hotels specifically, but it may be one of the areas that is covered by another category. I hadn't heard us say anything about hotels. Not that we require a lot, because people aren't moving around much right now.
Karen might be able to talk about, give us.
Yeah, Karen.
Sure. I can tell you that this last week, our hotel occupancy bumped just a little bit. We had a 22.3% occupancy for the previous week. We had the week before it was 19, the week before that it was 16%. Again, it's still a lot. The hotel in Manhattan that is performing the best is the Candlewood, because of it being an extended stay property. People can shelter in, prepare their own food, etc. But beginning to see a little bit more activity of people beginning to move. Again, I think that goes back to when we were talking about dining venues, people just gaining that confidence in just confidence in the community that it's safe in which to travel. So many of the properties are functioning with very, very limited staff. So they are eager to get back to
I mean, I just made a note. I do think we need to talk about the building confidence some more next week as well.
Yes.
Other topics for our meeting next Thursday at 2:00.
This is Shiloh Hager, the Riley County Treasurer. And
Yes.
I just thought by next Thursday, I will have a little bit better idea of how our second half taxes have come in. So I'll at least be able to share a little information about that. And the county is meeting to start working on our procedures as well for opening up to the public. And so we will have some guidelines hopefully in place by next week to be able to share that with the group as well as to how we're going to handle what I'm sure will be an influx of customers coming in starting on the 18th.
Okay, perfect. Jason, was there anything you want to add before we go out, sign off?
No, just appreciate everybody for being here again today.
Well, thank you, everybody. If you need something in the meantime, get a hold of Jason or I, or Christy or Dennis. Thanks, Colonel Kelly. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.